So much, $2 trillion. That is how much federal regulation cost the U.S. economy last year. Ed Conard is with me now. He is the former managing partner at Bain Capital. Elizabeth MacDonald has been digging through the numbers from the Competitive Enterprise Institute. So, Liz, I saw a headline that read a hidden tax of more than $14,500 every single household, 29% of the average American's income. This is what every single family paid because of wastefulness. Is that true?
It's red tape rising. This is a whopping big number that Competitive Enterprise Institute has calculated. We're not sure how they arrived at the number. If it's true, it would rank ahead of Canada in terms of size and India, and it would be just behind Russia. It would be, Regulation Nation
so the
is pretty big.
The amount of wastefulness is actually like the 10th biggest nation in the world.
Yeah, that's right after Russia. And what the problem is with Regulation Nation is, everybody's for safety belts and fluoride in toothpaste, and they're against pollution. This is about something else. And this is about this idea that unelected bureaucrats and unelected intellectuals are setting rules for the market without ever experiencing what it takes to run a business themselves. And so, I'll tell you something. More than 600,000 pages have been added to the Federal Register during the Obama administration.
So it is a 6 all-time high Federal Register total page counts. And we know, as you say, this is a record amount if you look at some of the other administrations. Ed, you have a very usually septic take on things. What is your take?
Well, I don't know how the number was calculated. It's a tough number to calculate. But if you slow down long-term growth, the impacts can be enormous. If you look at the productivity gains since 2007 when we went into recession, we've only been at 1.5% a year. We were at about 3.2% before that. And if you look historically in the 1960s and the 1990s when we backed off on regulation, we saw higher growth, higher productivity growth. And in the decades when we increased regulation, the 70s, and today we've seen significant fall off in productivity growth.
From a policy point of view, what do you make of regulation being used to navigate versus legislation? I mean, some people say this is Congress's fault. They really haven't done much.
I think it's typical. I mean, they've been doing this for all of time, and we know whether you tax or regulate, either way, you're going to slow down growth significantly.
The issue, too, is that regulations don't show up in the budget process at all. So nobody really knows in Congress what is going on behind the scenes. For every law enacted, there are on average 16 new regulations that are put in place by these bureaucrats, and nobody really knows the true size of it or the impact of it. I'll tell you, the fallout you see regularly at the IRS, and it's been called the Museum of Mass Confusion for a reason, because they're having difficulty overseeing all of these regulations. And when you consider if it's $1.88 trillion, I'll tell you, that's a lot. 62 major regulations annually under the George W. Bush administration versus 81 annually under the Obama administration, meaning costing the economy $100 million or more.
Well, getting back to my other point, I mean, in the sense that Congress, I know in 2013 was something like the most ineffective Congress on record ever since the nation started as far as pieces of legislation passed, and some people would say this is a failure of leadership. So in other words,
it's
Congress
a failure
can't come
of leadership,
together.
a failure of oversight. It is the vegetative universe run amok in the federal government. Just a half a dozen federal agencies are responsible for half of these regulations. They include HHS, Treasury, which houses the IRS, and the EPA. We do not know truly what these unelected bureaucrats are doing to the U.S. economy.
Right, so it's not Congress. It's the executive branch and the regulatory departments that go with it. Congress passes kind of general laws, and then you get an enormous number of regulations.
But what about all this
roadblock
that we talk about? Okay, for example, very few pieces of legislation have passed, and you're saying that's not exactly Congress's fault.
I think there were very large pieces of legislation passed with Obamacare and with Dodd-Frank, and that has led to an enormous amount of follow-on regulation that's created by the unelected bureaucrats, not by Congress voting in laws.
So
and
basically,
that's
restaurants, lobbyists, and these are the people who are probably...
And that's a great point that you bring up. And this is so important. The big guys can handle with their lobbyists the regulation, right? And sometimes you'll hear the big banks, even Goldman Sachs behind the scenes has said, I know it. I've talked to people at Goldman Sachs. I talked to people in government. I talked to people in business and on Wall Street. They say that it is to our benefit to have a lot of regulations because it ices out the little guys. The community bankers, the small guys, the small businesses don't have that, power to go in there and say, you know what, we don't like this regulation enough. So it hurts the little guy.
Yeah, and they can't afford to pay for a presence on K Street. Thank you both. Ed, you're
Sure.
staying here. Liz MacDonald, as always. Well.